Hello, hello. All right. Today's video lecture is very easy. It's going to be a quick one. It's the Industrial Revolution. It's the first American Industrial Revolution. The time frame we're covering, the 18 teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. All right. It's a very straightforward approach to this one. It's not much to it. All I'm going to really do is talk about causes of and consequences of. So cause and effect, right? So to get started, let's talk about the causes, all right? For the test, this lecture is really good. Give me 3 or 4 causes or consequences of the Industrial Revolution. So keep that in mind when you're studying for this test. But some of the major causes of the Industrial Revolution, part 1. All right. One, of course, is that transportation revolution that we talked about during the era of good feelings with Robert Fulton's steamboat, the Clermont, and the coming of the steamboat plays a huge role. Another big one is, of course, the railroads. The railroads would also play a huge role in just changing American culture forever and transporting people and goods, just like the steamboat. Another big one, of course, are the canals. Remember we talked about the first one with the Erie Canal. All of these huge things just revolutionized transportation technology and just rocketed us forward with what we were able to do and move. Another big one is technology. A lot of new technological innovations happened during this time. Let's talk about 2 different groups, like scientific technology or mechanical technology. The turret lathe comes into being during this time. The turret lathe is very important for metalworking and reproducing the same part over and over again. So you have the turret lathe, and also another important thing are interchangeable parts. In the past, when you had a gun and it messed up, you'd have to take it to the gunsmith. But now in this new modern age of America in the 1800s, the guns had interchangeable parts. So if the firing mechanism went out, you'd buy a new one. There you go. Simplification. All right. Also, we have changes in business technology. One of the things that occurs during this time is the birth of corporations. All right. In the past, individuals had owned businesses and owned things, but now groups were coming together to pool their money, pool their resources to create corporations. All right. Another major cause is population. America during the 1800s just kept drastically increasing in population. Our native population was growing rapidly. We also had large numbers of Irish and German immigrants coming into the nation as well, so that was increasing the population. And these Native Americans, these native white Americans in the population increase were the ones that really initially did this industrial work. So the factory workers, the managers, everybody in this first industrial revolution tended to be white Native Americans. During this time, you'll see that treatment of the people were better, pay was better. It's what happens when you have the white population of America involved in something instead of the immigrants or other ethnicities, right? It's one of the ways that you see the inherent racism. So we've got a few of our causes: the transportation revolution, technology, and population. All right. Another thing that plays a big role in this is religion. Religion is another major another major game changer. With this new Protestant evangelicalism that came to us through the Second Great Awakening really pushes individualism. Remember, this individual connection to God, this individual relationship with Jesus and God, and also pushes this idea of what becomes known as the Protestant work ethic, right? Or, putting your nose to the grindstone, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And religion plays a major role of promoting and pushing this idea of Americanism, of working hard and prospering, right? So the Second Great Awakening and this Christian work ethic starts promoting this industrialization. Another big one is communication. The transportation revolution really helped promote and push communication, but another major technological innovation would revolutionize communication. And that, of course, is the telegraph. Right? Samuel F.B. Morse, the inventor of the telegraph and Morse code, would be the one that would give us the telegraph. In a lot of ways, this is the birth of real time. What you've got is, as soon as something happens, people are on the telegraph sending it all over the nation. By the end of the 1800s, all over the world. So this telegraph system is huge. This allows people to know what's going on all over the U.S. every day, because this news travels so fast. With this, not only does it revolutionize how we find out about how we communicate with one another, how businesses communicate with one another, how everyone communicated, it also revolutionized journalism. With this information, all this information traveling all over the U.S., journalists were able to pull together newspapers. In some places like New York, by the end of the 1800s, you'd have a morning edition, a lunch edition, and an evening edition sometimes. But most major cities would have at least a morning and evening edition of the papers. And the newspapers were getting their information from the telegraphs going on. And this would keep people up to date. People would know what's going on here all over the U.S. and around the world. So, some of our big causes, right? Transportation revolution, the technological revolutions, the population increase, communication revolution, religion getting involved in promoting Americanism, and the last thing, we have the development of what we could call the factory system, or the commerce and factory systems. To give you an idea, always tell the story of Dexter Whitmore. All right. Dexter Whitmore owned a general store out in the middle of nowhere, all right, in New Hampshire. And Dexter always needed straw hats. He never had enough straw hats. He always needed more, wanted more straw hats. So he came up with this idea that we now refer to as the home industry. What he would do is he'd have people gather what's needed to make straw hats. They could turn it in for credit, or people could take this raw material home and weave straw hats, and they can bring the hats back for store credit. So you can kind of see, right? A man supplying raw materials to people to create a product to then sell. Right? So what you got is Whitmore with home industry kind of changing how commerce works. Lots of people were doing this. So this idea of people either gathering and getting resources and bringing them in and getting paid for it, or using the raw resources that he had, making the products and bringing it in and getting paid for it. So this is the early version of what would become the factory system, home industry. And then finally, in the 1800s, you get the system, the factory system, the industrial system. The first one here in America that gets a lot of press and a lot of focus is the Lowell system. All right, the Lowell system occurs in Lowell, Massachusetts. It's right outside of Boston, and it's some of the first textile mills, factory textile mills, large-scale textile mills, and they tended to be, well, they were worked by women, young women who weren't married yet. So these women would come and live, get room and board there, and also get paid. Many of them would save this up as their dowry, so when they got married, they would have something. So you have this factory system of native white young ladies that worked in the system, that were roomed, boarded, and worked, right? So you have a system in the beginning that takes care of them and pays them well. They get a decent pay, they're provided everything they needed in shelter, and you have the beginnings of this textile industry. So some of the big causes, right? We've got the transportation revolution, a lot of the new technology that would help push it, both business and mechanical and scientific. We have the population increase. We have the communication revolution. We have, the Protestant work ethic, the Christian work ethic, and this move in commerce and industry from being agricultural into this new system, from home industry on into the factory system. So, right there, what you've got are some of the things I think of when I think of the causes of this first industrial revolution in America. All right. So that's done. Now let's wrap this up with our last key point: the consequences of this first industrial revolution. All right. So, one, what are the consequences? This diversifies our economy. Remember, at the end of the 1700s, beginning of the 1800s, America was more than 90% agricultural. All right. But due to the many changes going on in America during, from 1800 to 1860, it changes drastically. By 1860, before the Civil War, it changed to 50% were agriculturalists, 50% were city. So you have this big change in that 60 years from America mainly being an agricultural world at 90%, and by 1860 it being half and half rural, half urban, half agricultural, half commercial. So we have this big change that way. Also, it diversifies the economy instead of it just being us, agricultural goods. We also have, industrial goods as well, and commercial goods. So, also, this is the downfall of the craftsman, right? With the downfall of the craftsman, what I mean is the artisan, however you want to say it. The artisan is the one that had always made things. Like I was talking about earlier, the gunsmith, you have a cobbler, you have the silversmith, you have the blacksmith. You have these specialty trades that have been with us since Europe and the Middle Ages. These people working and training, throughout the centuries, knowing how to do these things. The artisan was the one that made all of our products. But with the coming of industrialization, this changes. And instead of going to the cobbler for shoes, you'd go to the store and buy shoes. They tended to be cheaper, a lot cheaper. They were not as well made, they didn't last as long, but instead of having one pair of shoes, you could get multiple pairs of shoes in different colors, right? People started thinking about quantity over quality. And this idea of the artisan versus mass production, it's a losing battle. People would much rather have more shoes, different colors of shoes, than have a pair of good shoes. And in the end, what this actually does is it runs these cobblers, these, skilled tradesmen, these artisans, out of business. And a lot of the times they end up working in the industries that put them out of business. So we have the downfall of the skilled artisan, the craftsman. Another one, and this is what we'll end with. All right. The last one we really need to talk about is how this changes society. For one, this gives us leisure time, or days off, downtime to where we have more downtime. And with this, reading, theaters, music, entertainments of all kinds become more and more important to the American population. So with this industrialization, this gives us it gives us the time to really develop what would become our popular culture. And we'll be talking about that a lot more and when we get past test 2. All right, another thing. This changes family organization. This changes everything. All right. No longer is it mom, dad, and the family working on the farm. We get really the modern dynamic, the modern push. This is where we get, and this time is starting to rethink, and remake what it means to be a man in America. All right. The new man, is one that is a team player. He's steady. He's always productive. He's a hard worker. He's responsible. He's always on time. He's part of a team, right? Very different from the man that would go out into the wilderness and carve his own world out of it. Can you see the American male that was like Jackson in the factory? It's a big shift, right? It's a big shift going from the old idea of you're the king of your own castle. You go out into the wilderness and just force it to be what you need, into a guy that comes into work, works well with others, does what he's supposed to, works hard, very steady. It's a big change. Also, women and the children. The lower class women during this time still work. They're the ones that tend to work in the textile mills as it goes along. And you also have the young ladies from the white Native Americans that work in these textile factories in this first industrial revolution until they get married. It's during this time that it's really pushed that an American woman should be at home taking care of the kids, the house, those kind of things. Also, another thing is you get the birth of the middle class. In the past, you just had people that had and had not, right? You had the landowners and you had people that didn't own land. With the middle class, this is a whole new group of people made possible by this commerce and industrial change. Middle managers, bankers, business owners in this new urban world created this new middle class. So you have the rich, you have the middle class, and you have the poor. That's where we get this structure, is during this time. Also, it's during this from this to the beginning of the 1900s. You also see this in the second industrial revolution really getting solidified. During this first industrialization and during the second industrialization during the 1800s, this story starts to circulate. Rags to riches. You could be no one. You could have nothing and work hard enough. Determination, hard work would take you from having nothing to having everything, right? You could go from rags to riches, all right? So you also have this idea of social mobility that, you could work your way up through this system and make more and more money and do better and better for yourselves. It was not based on, you know, what you were born with. It was based on merit and work. Also, one last thing, and like I said, this is a short one for you guys and gals. One last thing is the wealthy. You've always had a wealthy elite in every country and in every place in the world. All right. To kind of give you an idea, by 1860, by right before the beginning of the war, you would have about 5% of the American population control 50% of the wealth. So you have an increase in money, but you only have about 5% really, really benefiting from this. So you've got 5% of the American population by 1860 that would be considered rich. All right. And this changes. It continues to change. By the 1890s, in what's known as the Gilded Age, which we'll get into next semester, you have 5%, and they control about 90% of the wealth. So you'll see the rich get richer, while the poor get poorer, and the average person gets poorer. So by the 1890s, you have that 5% controlling about 90% of the wealth. Nowadays, it's even worse than it used to be. For a while, we worked on it with governmental regulations and controls, and it decreased for about a century. But once all of these restrictions, like the Glass-Steagall Act and many of the things that would be created in the Roosevelt administration, was gotten rid of, we're now to a point where we have 1% of the wealth, 1% of the population, controlling about 98% of the wealth. So think about that. We're at the point in American history where 1% of the population, maybe 2, if you're very generous, control about 98% of the wealth. The rich get richer, while the rest of us don't and get poorer and poorer. So we have some of the causes and some of the consequences of industrialization. All right. Everyone have a good day.